Hello everyone, my name is Holly. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you clicked on this video because you are just interested enough in hearing my thoughts and opinions on some crazy hype new fantasy, which are both about to grace the world in February. We are talking about The Justice of Kings and Age of Ash. Both are adult fantasies which are being published by Orbit Books, and I'm so grateful they gave me the opportunity to read these early. In fact, we are looking at my first two reads of the year, and I'm happy to say I started 2022 with a bang. It's looking very promising for me reading wise if my future reads can be at all similar to these two. So I'm going to start this duo review with The Justice of Kings. This is a very early arc. I'll post a picture of what the finished copy will look like. The illustration is so bomb. I've had this arc since November, and as this is one of my most anticipated releases, I couldn't help but read a few chapters back then. And my immediate rough first impression was this is similar to The Witcher. Maybe with the release of the show, we're going to see that style of storytelling in mainstream media even more, and I wouldn't argue with it. So you kind of had that here, but with more bells and whistles. Anyways, January comes along, read it fully, and it solidified that comparison even more for me. The perspective we follow was very unexpected. Upon looking at the finished cover, you think, oh, we're gonna follow this guy. Nope, we see the story through the eyes of Helena, who is the clerk to Vonvolt, who I'm sure is the person on the cover. He looks like he could easily grace one of those thrones in Skyrim. And he is the Emperor's Justice. He travels the land to be the judge to crimes, basically. We also have a third character who is like the muscle of the group, and this trio we follow reminded me a lot of Wax, Wayne, and Marcy from the Wax and Wayne series by Brandon Sanderson. So those are my two comparisons. And if that isn't like an immediate add to your TBR, who are you? Why are you here? So they travel with Vonvolt, serving justice across the empire. They have a run-in with a settlement where there's been a murder of the Lord's wife, which is very peculiar. Well, Vonvolt is kind of like behind the times. Unfortunately, there's a bit of turmoil happening amongst the order. Some powerful people are shielded, so to speak, against his justice. His quote is literally, "No man is above the law," and that's just not the case anymore. So we're having to deal with that. Being a justice comes with a lot of advantages though. Vonvolt has these special powers that help him in his investigations, like necromancy, which the way that's described is really haunting, and also what is known as the Emperor's Voice, which is the power to compel a man to reveal his mind. Now that really makes you think, oh, Vonvolt is OP, he's overpowered, but he is a very respectful man, and there are consequences to using it, as it does not work in every circumstance or even on all men, and it's written in such a realistic way. In fact, there's a lot of tension with these powers, as some societal groups argue they should be forces of religion instead of law, which makes religion a big factor here. So you have this murder investigation, a mysterious cult-like army rising up in the background, our main character who definitely has a lot of anxiety, which is written very well, and all of these conflicts are paced so well together. I breezed through this book. I swear it felt like I had been reading for like 10 minutes and I was 100 pages through, and I love books like that. I loved the way the author described all the different towns our characters visit, from cottages, townhouses, temples, watchtowers, the wood smoke rising from them, the snow, all the different sorts of people living in them. You can clearly see everything as it's described. It was one of my favorite experiences while reading, was just being able to picture the medieval ruddy environment. The author's writing is very easygoing but still detailed, like not so detailed that it's flowery and takes away from the plot. It's just like the right amount. It's perfect. In fact, the way this book is written actually is kind of genius, because every now and then you'll get to passages where the perspective of Helena is almost talking to you from the future. For example, she'll say, "Looking back now, this is where our mistakes began," and it made reading way more ominous, like, oh, this is almost like Name of the Wind or like the Farseer trilogy style. The character you're following is telling you the story of the past. Not fully, but it's definitely sprinkled in. The main character will speak of regret, like, oh, at the time we could have avoided all of this. And it's like, what happened? Something horrible must have happened. So it keeps you reading. It makes sense with our perspective being a clerk who logs everything. And all of the chapters end on ominous cliffhangers. A chapter will end like, this would be in fact the worst day of our lives, and that's just rude. Oh, and I want to mention that this is a fantasy, but the book takes on an almost horror aspect later, which I wasn't expecting, but I really enjoyed it and I wouldn't mind seeing more of it. This is the first book to a trilogy, and I'll definitely be looking forward to the rest. It's a new favorite book of mine. It will definitely be displayed here on my favorite shelf, which is Running Out of Room. That's either a reader's worst nightmare or a wet dream. I don't know. Okay, moving along to the second part of this video, my second read of the year, which was Age of Ash, which definitely deserves its own segment here. This is written by one of the authors who co-wrote Leviathan Wakes under the pen name James S.A. Corey. How cool is that? He's expanding even more into some epic fantasy. That greedy son of a bitch just wants to take over all the genres in the bookstores. In all seriousness, I was very excited to see what he can do, and he wrote a story that flew by. His writing still holds up even when not in space. The story here begins ominously with a funeral procession throughout the city of Kithamar for the prince. In fact, I believe it's the prologue, and then the story shifts to the past, and the rest of the book is like a build-up to that moment. In fact, I think it spans a whole year before. We are then introduced to a couple of our main characters, Elise, who is a young street thief, and her brother, who is a hired knife, and he takes care of them with the money he makes from that. Unfortunately, tragedy strikes for our characters. I'm keeping that as vague as possible because I was personally shocked by it, and I want you to be as well, but a haunting mystery stems from it. I'll be honest, this story is very sad. It's very deep, and it's written in a very prophetic sort of way. And though that's the case, the book begins so fast-paced and really exciting. There's thieving happening, very mysterious light magic slash kind of witchy stuff at play. The city being described felt so alive and disgusting at the same time. The amount of times poop is mentioned is a lot, so be warned. Actually, I can kind of show you here on the cover that most of the story is taking place in this bottom section right here. So like here down is basically the slums. This giant city above we don't see a ton of. Maybe that'll be in future books, but the story is really centered on our lowborn characters. I really wish we could have expanded upon more parts of the city, but for 450 pages, we are here. Next, I want to talk about the amount of perspectives and how the story is told through them, because it will definitely be the end-all be-all for readers. This will either make it or break it for people. I kept track of all of them, and there were 8 different perspectives by page 100. The changing perspectives reminded me a lot of the Red Knight, but where in that book it was a negative for me because it was so convoluted. In this case, it works. It is much easier to follow. Like, it'll change to a perspective that isn't going to be a main character, but they're going to be interacting with them and still tell their story. I hope that makes sense. I think it made things more interesting. I know that can be alarming, but it's also what kept the book moving so fast. The chapters are so short, and writing style is super fluid, so I blew through these 450 pages very quickly. Speaking of the writing style, it's incredibly beautiful, almost on the verge of flowery, which I know is a term readers like to use for very descriptive, detailed sentences, and this is kind of like that. It was actually almost too much for me. There were quite a few times I just wanted to move on to the important story parts, but the author was still talking about the snow that was on the ground, and like, okay, like, let's move on. There's a lot of padding around the story, and I think it could have used a little bit less. Another problem I had were the 2 main female characters who are friends slash rivals, I guess. Their personalities are incredibly similar. There wasn't much of a difference between them, so that made it hard for me to care for them or maybe even lean towards one more than the other. They are literally the same character. Honestly, I was hovering between 4 and 3 stars for this book the whole time I was reading it, because there's so many things about it that still make it a great read, but the ending is what solidified my 3 stars, and I can't even say why because it concerns how it ends, but that's all I can say. You'll just have to read it for yourself and form your own thoughts. I am still very interested in continuing with the story because there is so much potential for it to be even better. Like, the foundation is set and now it needs to be built upon. So those are my thoughts and opinions on some brand new fantasies coming your way very soon. I gave you some pros and cons, but now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you excited for these books? Have you gotten the chance to read them early? Do you have any of them pre-ordered? Definitely let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and hey, maybe it helped you on deciding what you're going to read, clicking the like button always helps me out, and maybe consider subscribing if you're new, maybe hitting that notification button because I put out videos every single week. So until we meet again, happy reading.